Everyone, this is Carson, also known online as Emberwick, and today I'm going to be going over how to use magic in my tabletop game, Tales from Myriad. So first things first is that the magic in this game is a little bit different than what you may have come to expect from other tabletop games, specifically the fact that there are no spell slots, there are no limits on how many times you can cast a spell that you have. Secondly, is that most of the magic in the game comes from magical items, which means if you want more spells, you're going to have to go out there and get them. The only exception to this are nature and performances, but those come at a much slower rate than just going out and finding magic. So each of these types of magic have special little quirks to them, which you can see here in the types of magic and their quirks. You've got the arcane spells. They always come in threes inside of a magic item. Occult trinkets come with 2 spells and what's called an invocation, which is a secondary effect that occurs when you roll a 6 while casting. More on casting and stuff later. Divine spells have to be articulated vocally, and a divine manuscript can be added to over time instead of taking up increasing amounts of inventory slots. Secondly, divine manuscripts always come with a once per day charge that can be expended like you're using a component in order to cast a spell, and I'll get to components after casting. Then you got the nature spells. They can only be learned naturally, and while there is no focus required in your inventory, nature spells can only be cast if the available element is nearby, unless it states that it conjures the effect. Okay, so in order to cast the spell, you have what is called a casting difficulty, which comes with every spell, or CD. You can see here over at casting we have a spell that we were saying is going to have a CD of 3 up, which means that that is the number that you are trying to roll on the face of 1 or more dice. And we have our magic modifier here, a +4 in arcane. So what you do is you roll a number of 6-sided dice equal to or up to your magic modifier, which means I can roll 1, 2, 3, or 4 d6 in order to try to cast the spell. The reason you would not want to just use all of them all at once all the time is because you get miscasting from rolling doubles, triples, and so on. So it's up to you how much you use. Now I know that the Scholar has an ability where they use d8s instead of d6s to cast. For the examples of this, we're just going to be using a d6. Now, the type of modifier that you're looking at is going to be based on the spell that you are casting. If it is an arcane spell or if it comes inside of an arcane item, you're going to use arcane. Divine and nature are for insight, and you have occult for occult. Pretty simple. Okay, so let's say we've got our casting difficulty of 3 up, and I have an arcane bonus of +4. I am going to choose to roll 3d6 in order to try to cast this spell. You can see down here. So a 3, a 5, and a 6. So all of these dice are called successes, or S if a spell references successes, because each of them are 3 or higher. Now, because we rolled a 6, magic also follows the exploding dice rolls, and we would roll an extra d6 on top of this. So that's pretty much casting. You roll a number of d6 up to your magic modifier, and you're trying to hit the casting difficulty on the face of one of them, so you're not adding them up. And up next, we've got charging. Charging is pretty simple. It's like you are charging a spell like you would charge a battery. You are doing it to make the cost of it a lot easier to cast if it has a steep cost. So you've got charging here. If the power of a spell is steep, caster can use to charge the spell. It will decrease the casting difficulty by 1 for each turn, not round, spent charging. Instead of rolling, the caster must announce that they are charging and begin to both visibly and audibly cast the spell. So it is obvious when somebody is charging a spell. There's no stealth charging. They can choose to partially channel the spell, announcing how many turns they are channeling for. However, they can only charge for a number of turns up to their magic modifier or the spell's casting difficulty, whichever is lowest. So in the case of this spell here, we would only be able to do it for 3 turns. We would not be able to do it for 4. The turns spent charging are counted at the start of the next turn so that players can't just charge for 1 and cast a spell at the end of their turn with a lower casting difficulty. So you can see here, it would go off at the end of somebody else's turn. Let's say I wanted to charge for 3. So what would happen is I say, I'm charging for 3 over here. What this means is it goes 1 ends the end of the enemy turn, so the next enemy turn will be getting a chance to do something about it. 2 end of my next ally's turn. 3, end of the next enemy's turn. So, for example, casting for 2 is a little bit of a safer option because you know that your ally is going to be coming after an enemy. That's just how initiative works in this game. But it will come at the end of the turn so that if you are casting or channeling or charging in a precarious situation where people can physically restrain you or stop you from speaking in order to cast the spell, it will result in a miscast and they can stop the spell from going off. Alright, so up next we have channeling the spell. Channeling the spell is similar to concentration in other tabletop games. Basically what that means is that you are actively sitting there and you are channeling the magic, and it is going on for as long as you are channeling it. The amount or the number of turns that you are channeling for is always equal to the casting difficulty. So this casting difficulty here is a 3, then it will last for 1, 2, 3 turns. This is the duration of the spell's effect. It is occurring over the course of these 3 turns. It's pretty much that. You can go from charging into channeling, so I can charge for 3, 1, 2, 3, and then be channeling for 3, 1, 2, 3. You are allowed to do that. So one more note about casting difficulties. If you see, for example, a ×2 at the end of it, or so on, what that means is that you need 2 successes in order to cast the spell. So if I was rolling, for example, a 3-up ×2, I would roll this. So a 3 and a 6. There are 2 successes. I am able to cast the spell. The ×2 does have nothing to do with the amount that you can channel or charge it, though. It is only ever equal to the 3-up or 4-up amount of the casting difficulty. Alright, so counterspelling. In order to counter a spell that a target is casting, you must use your reaction to cast the spell in your possession that is logically diametrically opposed to the spell you are trying to counter. For example, a spell that would teleport an object may be useful in countering a spell that would conjure something physical, and the more obvious elemental forces like fire and ice, light and dark, and so on would counter each other. The spell you choose must be a spell of the same magic origin as the spell you are countering, arcane, occult, or divine in nature. So basically it has to use the same magic modifier type. What this means is that counter spells are rare and they are risky. You will not be countering spells often. It is usually easier to stop somebody while they are charging or channeling a spell than it would just to counterspell a spell, because you do need to actively have a counter to the spell. Counterspells work via a success versus success system, meaning the number of successes you achieve trying to cast your spell as determined by each individual casting difficulty, subtracted from the number of successes the target rolls. What this means is, let's say Captain Evil here, which is what I'm calling him, he's going to try to cast his spell and it has a casting difficulty of 4-up. Let's say he's casting something with fire. So he would roll. So he got a 3, a 6, and a 4. So that is going to be 2 successes. He has 2 successes, right? Now this 6 would also explode, so let's go ahead and roll an extra one for him. So another 6, that is 3 successes, and he's going to start miscasting. And if he had a luck modifier of +1, he would roll that again. But let's say he doesn't. So he has 3 successes after trying to cast the spell, and he's going to be getting a miscast. Now I am going to be over here, and I'm going to try to counter it with some sort of ice. I am also going to use 3d6. So let's roll this. Okay, so a 3 and a 5. This is 2 successes for me over here because my casting difficulty for the ice spell that I'm trying to cast is a 3-up. So I've got 2. What this means is that I have reduced his successes down to 1. However, he still has 1 success. So not only is that spell going to go through, but I'm going to get hit with a tier 1 miscast because I have placed myself in the way of the magic spell to try to stop it, and as such, I am being affected by the magic. Now, let's say that this was reversed. I got 3 successes, and he only got 2. Well, what this means is not only does his spell not go off, but he gets affected by tier 1 miscast because it is the difference between these. So if I got 4 successes, he would get hit with a tier 2 miscast, and so on. Same would be effective of me. This is helpful to just simply reduce the amount of successes somebody's done if they are trying to cast a spell that requires successes. So for example, if this was a 4-up times 3 and I reduced it, if he had 3 successes and I had 2 successes, it would go down to a 1, which means I would get hit with the tier 1 miscast, but he would not be able to cast that spell anymore, which is why counterspelling can be useful for stopping more powerful magics. Okay, so last but not least, we come to the performances. Performances are a special type of magic that relies on your charm usually. Performances are always channeled for a number of turns equal to the number in the parentheses. That depends for the thing. Because they have no casting difficulty, you just start performing. The effect of the performance happens during those turns to those who can witness it unless specified. You do not need to roll to start a performance, and they do not miscast. Now, you do need to finish the performance. You cannot just do it for one turn and then decide to stop. You are effectively channeling a spell, so it will be active for the whole time. However, if somebody stops you, you don't just get a miscast. So let's look here. If we had Scholar Sonata, decreases the casting difficulty by half of your charm modifier in a 10-foot radius. That means everybody in a 10-foot radius from you for 5 turns. So again, if we're looking at turns here, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for this whole duration, everybody within 10 feet of you decreases the casting difficulty of all of their spells by half of your charm modifier. So if I had a charm modifier of 3, I would round it down, most likely. If I had a modifier of 3, I would round down, so everybody would have their casting difficulty decreased by 1. That is effectively it. That is how to cast spells and magic in Tales from Myriad. I hope that this helped. It was informative. Remember, it is just a number of d6 up to your magic casting modifier, and you were just looking for that casting difficulty to try to cast a spell. It is a relatively safe option to charge and channel spells if you can, because unless you are in the thick of it, especially if you have a spell that has a steep cost and you don't have any components on you, charging a spell is usually a good way to get it through. You're not wasting your turn, you're just making sure that you can actually cast the spell. Alrighty, so with that in mind, I hope you cast a lot of fun spells in Tales from Myriad, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye.